everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. And welcome to episode 3 of our Real Life Sabbatical series titled Real Life Interrupts. As a reminder, we're running this sabbatical series as a very limited podcast grouping of episodes for folks that are on the sabbatical so that you can ride along with me on my sabbatical. This particular episode, Real Life Interrupts, is just like it sounds. It's really dealing with real life interrupting some of the things that I thought I was going to get accomplished, but have not gotten accomplished so far. So I brought some visual aids for those of you on YouTube. But one of the ways real life interrupted me in this last week and a half of my sabbatical work is I got the flu. So I'm holding up my baggie of oyster crackers and my ginger ale because that's all I've been able to keep down for several days. And, this is one of those things where sabbatical time seems so precious and you don't want to let any of the sands drip out of the hourglass because you're not going to get this time back. And it's supposed to be this wonderful, creative moment. But one of the most helpful pieces of information is something that my husband actually said to me. It was this idea that sometimes, your body breaks down when you get that moment to rest. And he suggested that maybe because I've been pushing so hard with work and with writing and parenting and all these other things that, maybe because I'm on sabbatical, my body just said, well, now we're going to have the flu. So that was one way that real life really interrupted. And so quite frankly, I've done no writing in probably 8 days. It might be 9. I have to look at it. And one other way that real life is interrupted kind of in the same time frame with a little bit of an overlap is I ended up having a kid with a stress fracture in a knee. So that meant lots of x-rays, an emergency room visit, various doctor's appointments, the physical therapist, all kinds of things. And between the two things, there just wasn't any bandwidth. There wasn't any room to get any writing or anything finished. And while in some ways it's lucky that these things happened during the course of the sabbatical, because a lot of people will say, well, that's so great. You didn't have to go teach. You didn't have to go to a meeting. And that is true. I was 100% grateful I wasn't trying to figure out what to do with my classes, because quite frankly, I probably in a normal semester would have had to cancel class at least 3 times in a week. So that's not something that I would have wanted to do, and it wouldn't have been ideal for anyone. So that is true, with a little bit more flexibility and the time away from teaching, I certainly could handle these other things. But at the same time, we know the sabbatical is designed to give you sort of that open time for thinking, for researching, for writing. And the way this is going to play out is I'm probably going to lose 2 weeks of that time. I know I said 8 or 9 days, but just being realistic, I'm not going to be able to have the stamina to, put in 8 hours at the desk writing tomorrow. I know today I'm recording this episode because I really want to catch kind of in the thick of things. I feel realistically, I could probably maybe spend an hour kind of figuring out where I left off, making a plan for when I feel a little bit better to write. But beyond that, I know I'm not going to do any writing. I know I'm not. I know it's not happening. And I also know with a situation with my daughter that I'm going to need to help her with some homework that she's missed and some other things. So I just know it's not happening. And so that doesn't mean that I'm giving up. And so I wanted to kind of end this episode to say, yes, real life interrupts. It's a bummer. I lost 2 weeks of work, but I also wanted to say, what am I going to do about it? So here's a couple ways, just having been through 2 other sabbaticals before and knowing that something always happens during the sabbatical for positive, or as a positive experience or a negative experience, but something always happens. So this is what I'm doing about it and why I'm not panicking in the moment. The first thing that I decided to do was just sort of accept the reality of the daily situation. And the daily situation for many days was I couldn't get off the couch, or I was at a doctor's appointment, with my daughter that might take 2 hours, and I had to run around and do a couple things on that front. I had to figure out, where do we put the crutches? What are, all the things that go along with having a stress fracture. So I just accepted this is not the day I'm going to have a great thought about my next book. It's just probably not going to happen. The second thing that I did, though, is I did try to, at least for a minute or two each day, just try to remember what was something that I was working on before? What are some things I might want to work on going forward? So one thing that I did do, which I'm very thankful that I did, and I know I didn't do it on my previous 2 sabbaticals, was I had like 5 minutes in the car when I was waiting to pick my daughter up for a early doctor's appointment. I just wrote on this Post-it very quickly just a couple of things I know about where I left off. And where I left off at the moment was I was in the middle of working on this book proposal piece for my next book. That's not actually the sabbatical project I'm working on. I've got a couple of projects. So that's something that I'll get to in another episode. But I knew I was working on this book proposal piece, and I had this really cool idea about organization. I was excited about it. I had started to dive into it. I started to do a little bit of outlining. And then the very next day was when my daughter ended up with a stress fracture in her knee. So then I was away from it for a couple of days, and then I ended up getting the flu on top of it. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose that organization. And so one thing that I did try to do, even if I felt kind of, not so great, I just looked at that Post-it. I didn't actually write anything about it. I had it kind of taped inside my laptop, but it was just that reminder to me, like, oh yeah, you are going to get back to the organization. Oh yeah, you're going to get back to the organization. And for me, that has kind of made me feel, even though this isn't actually maybe true, but it's made me feel like I'm still in my agenda for my sabbatical. I can't get to it today, but I can get to it the next time. And I know that has really had the effect of sort of letting me let it go for right now. Like, I can't get to it right now, but I know what I have to do when I come back to it. It will be fine. So maybe another piece of advice that I could give for somebody that has life creep up on them when they're in sabbatical, I am really trying to avoid having any kind of a time panic. And I know this is really difficult when you're in the middle of it. I've had time panic before in other sabbaticals. And what that means is that, let's say your sabbatical is 16 weeks. I am not lucky enough to have a sabbatical for a whole year. Mine is 1 semester. That's all I get. And I know that's all many of you get. But it doesn't matter if it's a year, a semester, whatever it is that you get. At some point, most people on sabbatical experience a time panic where you feel like, I have not used my sabbatical as effectively as I wanted to. I'm running out of time. I'm not going to get all these projects completed that I want to. But in some ways, that panic is a little bit worse than having the panic in a regular semester. Like, oh, I was supposed to get this article done. Because in a sabbatical, there's all the expectations that now your brain is clear and you have all of this time to do all the thinking and reading and writing. But we all know real life interrupts, just like it does in a regular semester. Life doesn't care that this is a sabbatical and you need to put that that issue in another semester. So having that time clock panic is something that I really want to avoid. And so one of the other ways that I'm avoiding it, or well, not avoiding it, I'm circumventing it is probably a better way to say it, is that I know at the point that I'm recording this, so I'm recording this around by the time this episode comes out, it'll probably be around the middle of February. I know that realistically, I'm only about 6 weeks into my sabbatical. And even then, not quite even 6 weeks, because I made a deliberate rule for myself that I was not going to start it until around mid-January, so I could have some extra time off to just get some house projects done and just to kind of take a real much needed vacation where I wasn't like on holiday with family or anything like that. Like, everybody was going back to work, everybody's going back to school, but I still got the 2 weeks break to just kind of get a grip on what it was I was working on. And so when I started thinking about it in that way, I realized I've really only been in this sabbatical 4 to 5 weeks. And if I've lost 2 of those weeks, that's not that big of a deal. I still have all these weeks left. Now, you might have a real life interruption at the end of the sabbatical and you won't be able to say that. But for people that are in the beginning or even the middle, usually there's some time left, and it will probably mean that I'll have to make some choices at the end of the sabbatical to decide what's not going to get completed. But I don't know that yet. I could come back totally rejuvenated in 2 days and be ready to work all day long. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I know just being more realistic with myself. Okay, you've got this amount of time left. There's still plenty of time, and kind of circumventing that time panic has been really helpful, I think, in the, where I am in this stage. So here's a couple other things just to lay out there to think about. If you have a real life interruption, sometimes on some of those days, not maybe when you're sick or there's like a real, medical disaster, which are the two that kind of hit me this time. But maybe there's something else that happened, maybe an unexpected funeral, maybe some family travel, something that has to take you away for a few days, something like that. And obviously, an unexpected funeral, it could depend on how close you were to the person. That could be something that's really eating into quite a bit of your time, and necessarily so. You might need to use that time for that. But if you've got something that maybe is a more short-term interruption, but it still knocks you out for 4 or 5 days, I think it's really easy to chalk it up and say, oh, I lost a whole week. But maybe there's still some smaller things that you could be doing. So one of the other things that I have been able to do while kind of dealing with the flu is I have been doing some reading and just kind of getting excited about some of the cool literature that I'm starting to get into. I'm reading something I can do where maybe I'm not going to be able to get through a whole scholarly article because my brain's just going to be really tired and I'm just going to want to do little bits at a time. But that's been really helpful. That's something that I can kind of stay with. Another thing that I did do a little bit of when I was feeling a little bit better, but not enough to, really sit and do full on writing. Another thing that I did that I thought was really helpful was just to organize some of the reading that I had been doing in groups. And I thought about why I wanted it. So this might be another strategy where you can't write, but you want to do something that seems like a little bit more intellectual and make some progress. It was very helpful for me after doing some reading during this sabbatical to say, all right, this is all the stuff I've read so far. Why do I want these pieces? And some of them I knew. For example, my proposed sabbatical project is doing interviews with faculty about their writing processes and their project management systems from a narrative point of view. So I actually hearing narratives from faculty about how they do that. Well, one of the things that I found that was really helpful was looking at other people that used a narrative structure in interview. So that's like more methodology. So I grouped some of my articles according to methodology. But then I also had some that were just about different catchphrases that faculty use to describe writing when they filled out surveys or interviews. That's a whole different grouping. I also had a grouping about how there's not very much about project management from a faculty perspective. That's another grouping. So I had a lot of different groups, and that also helped me really think ahead to, okay, well then I kind of know maybe what some of the bones of this literature review for this article are going to look like now. So even though I haven't written those sections, I do sort of know after doing that grouping. So that's something, just as an example of something that's intellectual. You do need to think about it. You maybe want to be careful when you do it, but it's not something that I have to do all at once. I can do it in pieces. I could look, one article at a time to kind of determine what buckets I'm using and so on. So hopefully that gives you an example of something that could be a real life strategy and a real life sabbatical once you have some interruptions. But if there's other things that you have questions about for sabbaticals, I'm always willing to listen to any of those suggestions, and I would love to hear some, and I'll make sure that I address them in other episodes. But if you would like to send any of those to me, I'm at Christine@defendpublishedlead.com, and happy writing this week.